Text on the screen describes the situation in medieval Europe. The Huns are pushing west and bringing war everywhere. The kingdom of Burgundy fights for its very survival. The brave king rides out to defend his borders. Thick white fog covers the dark forest around the army. The soldiers slowly walk forward with their weapons ready. They discover a completely destroyed and burning village. Dead bodies and ruined huts are scattered everywhere. Suddenly, a brown horse steps aside near a structure. This movement reveals a hidden enemy archer taking aim. The man fires an arrow directly at the king. The attacker immediately flees on horseback through the misty trees. Marshal Hagen rushes to help his fallen leader. The king lies bleeding with an arrow in his neck. He dies in Hagen's arms before anyone can help. A solemn funeral takes place inside a grand stone church. Mourners carry the king's draped coffin toward the altar. Hagen stares downward and feels crushed by heavy guilt. He remembers a painful moment from his tragic childhood. A young boy sits shivering in a dark wooden tub. A massive bloody scar marks his bare shoulder. A voice explains how he survived a terrible beast attack. The old king adopted the boy after that tragedy. Later, an angry Hagen strikes a wooden training dummy. Princess Kriemhild approaches him wearing a heavy fur cloak. She tells Hagen that the tragedy is not his fault. She assures the marshal that he remains family. Soon, Prince Gunther is crowned as the new ruler. Gunther sits on his stone throne and addresses his council. The desperate kingdom is surrounded by dangerous enemies. The new king urgently needs to secure a strong alliance. He announces that his sister will marry the Langobard king. Hagen finds Kriemhild outside and delivers the difficult news. The princess looks down with a deeply sorrowful expression. She accepts her painful duty without raising an objection. During a storm, 11 armed men build a fire outside the castle gates. Hagen stands on the wet wall to inspect the strangers. A mysterious shadow appears near him in the rain. The eerie shadow whispers about his scars before vanishing. The next morning, the foreign group rides through the main gates. Castle guards instantly surround them with raised spears and large shields. Princess Kriemhilde watches the arrival from a high stone window. She notices a cloaked rider looking directly up at her. The rider's face suddenly morphs into an old woman. Inside the throne room, King Gunther meets the foreign leader. The man introduces himself as Siegfried, the Prince of Zonten. He mentions that their fathers were allies in past wars. The room goes quiet when Siegfried unexpectedly draws his sword. He boldly challenges King Gunther to a duel for the kingdom. Royal guards instantly point their heavy spears at Siegfried's chest. Siegfried just smiles playfully and lowers his blade. He asks to stay as a guest instead, and Gunther agrees. Later, Kriemhilde speaks to Hagen in a dark stone corridor. She describes the shape-shifting rider and looks extremely worried. She fears the rider is an evil old one from dark legends. She firmly states her brother should have sent the group away. That night, a thick fog covers the castle courtyard. Hagen silently follows the cloaked figure through the dark alleys. He reaches out and tightly grabs the figure's shoulder. The shape instantly collapses into a pile of ordinary sacks. Meanwhile, Siegfried is heavily intoxicated from drinking inside the tavern. He stumbles out into a wet alley and vomits. Hagen quietly walks up behind him in the shadows. He sternly warns Siegfried to leave the kingdom at once. Hagen tosses and turns in bed during a bad nightmare. In his dream, he discovers fresh blood in a stable. A cloaked figure hides quietly in the deep shadows. Hagen boldly tells the mysterious stranger he is unafraid. He explains that the old beings took away his fear. The shadow claims to know the origin of Hagen's scars. This triggers a painful childhood memory for the warrior. He remembers a terrifying dragon appearing in a raging fire. Hagen gasps and wakes up suddenly in his room. Later, chaos erupts across the busy castle courtyard. Soldiers struggle hard to control several deeply panicked horses. Kriemhilde tells Hagen that servants spotted the dark figure. They enter the stable and find a dead horse inside. Kriemhilde gently tries to soothe her own white horse. The animal suddenly rears up in absolute panic. It snaps its rope and bolts out the castle gates. Kriemhilde and Hagen quickly chase it on 2 black horses. They ride fast through a dense pine forest. Eventually, they spot the white horse by a river. Kriemhilde slowly walks toward the nervous animal to calm it. She reaches out to gently pet its face. The horse suddenly rears up and strikes her hand hard. It quickly gallops away into the surrounding trees. Hagen walks over to check on Kriemhilde's bleeding palm. He carefully wraps her wound with a torn cloth. Kriemhilde looks down with a sad and heavy expression. She softly admits she will deeply miss her home. This clearly shows she dislikes her upcoming arranged marriage. At the dining hall, men ask Siegfried about his travels. He explains that Queen Brunhilde called him in a dream. She can cast spells on men from across the world. The room goes completely silent during this very tense moment. Siegfried suddenly breaks the quiet tension and laughs out loud. He claims the magical story is just a funny prank. He also complains about the lack of women at the table. In the evening, Kriemhilde lights a candle in her bedroom. Siegfried suddenly opens her heavy door and boldly walks inside. He steps closer and tells Kriemhilde she is very beautiful. She looks tense and says he has absolutely no respect. She calls him a lost soul and forces him to leave. Meanwhile, Gunther stands and stares quietly into a glowing fireplace. Hagen approaches the king to argue against Kriemhilde's arranged marriage. Hagen promises that their own army is already strong enough. Gunther trusts him and agrees to cancel the wedding coping plan. However, the king still looks very worried about Siegfried's tale. He believes the story of the Valkyrie is not a lie. The next morning, Gunther meets Kriemhild by a stone fountain in the courtyard. He gently informs her that she does not have to marry. She smiles in deep relief and hugs her brother tightly. Later, the queen speaks to Hagen in the dark room. She states that her daughter was ready to make a sacrifice. Then she asks if Hagen is willing to make his own sacrifice. Outside, Hagen quietly watches his soldiers practice their sword drills. Soon after, Siegfried enters the training yard with his men. They spar, but their fighting looks like a messy street brawl. Siegfried acts wild and forgets it is just a drill. He knocks a man to the dirt and punches him repeatedly. His friends drag him away while he laughs like a maniac. Siegfried loudly asks the local soldiers for a new challenger. Hagen steps forward to face him with a serious expression. Siegfried suddenly grabs a spear and hurls it at him. Hagen simply raises a hand and catches the weapon easily. Hagen tells him they are preparing for a real war. He sternly warns Siegfried to take his childish game elsewhere. Just then, local soldiers lead a horse into the courtyard. A bloody dead body is slumped over the animal's saddle. A priest approaches the horse and carefully inspects the corpse. He reveals the dead man is from a northern border settlement. The unfortunate victim was clearly stabbed to death by enemies. Inside a dark hall, a large fireplace burns brightly. King Gunther stands near the flames with a tense face. He warns Hagen that the Saxons and Danes turned against them. The strongly fortified capital currently remains safe from the attack. However, the rest of the Burgundy kingdom will soon burn. Gunther desperately needs reliable allies for the rapidly approaching war. He strictly orders Hagen to use Siegfried's fighters in battle. Commander Hagen clearly dislikes this highly risky and unpredictable idea. Sometime later, Hagen slowly walks down some dark stone stairs. He enters a gloomy dungeon lit by a narrow window. Small candles flicker on the floor near strange ritual items. A short cloaked figure slowly steps out from the shadows. The pale little man finally reveals his identity as Alberich. He intensely stares at Hagen and mentions his painful scars. Alberich then shares a very dark secret story about Siegfried. He explains that Siegfried successfully killed a huge dragon alone. A visual shows a bloody Siegfried near a burned tree. Siegfried bathed completely in the dead beast's thick red blood. This magical bath made his skin completely invulnerable to weapons. However, a single dark leaf fell onto his bare back. That tiny spot of skin never touched the magical blood. Alberich heavily emphasizes this is Siegfried's only true hidden weakness. The dwarf also mentions forging a sword from dragon bones. Finally, Alberich yells angrily at Hagen from the deep darkness. He scolds him for letting Siegfried stay in the castle. He claims they foolishly gave the dangerous man a family. Inside a dimly lit chapel, Siegfried offers his service to Gunther. He firmly places his sword into Gunther's hands. He promises to spill blood for the king. Hagen watches this exchange from the shadows. Gunther turns to proudly announce their new alliance. The gathered soldiers raise their fists and cheer. Later, Hagen visits Kriemhild in her dark stone room. Heavy rain pours outside the narrow window. She asks why he stopped her arranged marriage. She knows the kingdom desperately needs strong allies. Hagen refuses to give her a direct answer. She gently tries to mention their hidden feelings. Hagen claims his only duty is protecting the realm. Kriemhild warns him their home will never be safe. The next morning, the army marches to war. They ride their horses across wide open fields. That night, the leaders gather inside a tent. Lit candles illuminate a map on the table. Hagen calmly explains his battle plan. He notes the enemies are brave but lack discipline. They must exploit this chaos to win. Siegfried looks bored by the tactical talk. He leaves to rest in the dark forest. He lies down comfortably on a mossy mound. Gunther follows him and sits nearby. He asks Siegfried about the Valkyrie. Siegfried stares up at the night sky. He explains she calls the warrior inside him. Late at night, Siegfried rides out to attack the enemy alone. The next morning, a thick mist covers the forest. Siegfried walks into camp and drops a severed head on the dirt. Hagen recognizes the dead man as the Saxon king. Siegfried announces that the leaderless enemies are now following him. He draws his sword and shouts for the men to attack. The excited soldiers cheer and charge into the woods. Hagen angrily yells for everyone to wait, but the men ignore him. A chaotic battle soon explodes among the tall trees. Hagen cuts down approaching enemies, but he mostly searches for King Gunther. Nearby, Siegfried fights fiercely without wearing any heavy armor. Suddenly, Hagen spots a bare-headed young soldier trapped on the ground. An enemy raises an axe to strike the boy. Hagen immediately lunges forward and stabs the attacker. He grabs the scared boy by the shoulders to calm him. Hagen then removes his own metal helmet. He securely places it onto the young soldier's head. The violent battle continues with heavy losses on both sides. Hagen sees his skilled archers surrounded by enemy soldiers. More attackers instantly block his path to the young woman. woman. Hagen watches helplessly as a man stabs the trapped archer. This terrible distraction gives an enemy time to strike. A soldier smashes a heavy mace directly into Hagen's face. Hagen instantly kills the attacker, but loses his left eye. He breathes heavily and collapses backwards into the thick mud. The massive Dane king approaches him with a large weapon. A cloaked Alberic quietly watches the moment from the ground. Siegfried suddenly leaps forward and kills the giant king. The army eventually returns home to their large stone castle. A massive crowd happily cheers for the victorious hero. Siegfried playfully throws himself backward into the excited crowd. Meanwhile, Kriemhild gently tends to an unconscious Hagen in bed. Feeling frustrated, she walks outside and finds Siegfried drinking. She sternly scolds him for disrespecting the dead soldiers. Siegfried calmly replies that death is just part of war. He believes fallen warriors should always be joyfully celebrated. He then asks the princess about Hagen's severe injuries. Kriemhild sadly admits that the wounded man is dying. Siegfried assures her that Alberic can fully heal him. Alberic approaches the injured Hagen in a dim room. He draws a black symbol on Hagen's bare chest. The dwarf then reveals the truth about Hagen's past. His famous childhood story was a complete lie. Gunnar's father had actually conquered Hagen's original home. His parents were killed during the violent raid. Young Hagen was left trapped inside a burning building. A large dragon flew down and snatched the boy with its sharp claws. This terrifying escape explains the scars on his back. The old king simply blamed the dragon for the destruction. Hagen eventually wakes up with a thick eye bandage. He visits the stone graves of the fallen soldiers. Siegfried soon approaches the grieving man. He firmly states that he regrets nothing. Later, Kriemhild walks into the empty throne room. She finds Siegfried standing in the quiet shadows. Siegfried claims that all empires will eventually collapse. He explains this is why he rejected his father's throne. Kriemhild is truly impressed by his lack of ambition. Kriemhild later carefully changes Hagen's bloody eye bandage. She admits she is very grateful to Siegfried. She is thankful because Siegfried saved Hagen's life. Hagen frowns and complains that Siegfried brings false hope. Kriemhild calmly replies that false hope is better than none. Hagen wears a black eye patch and watches a puppet show. He feels heartbroken seeing Kriemhild and Siegfried together. He stares to a stone window as they ride away. The pair travels on horseback through a foggy forest. They ride past giant, moss-covered stone ruins. Later, Siegfried kneels by a stream to wash his face. Kriemhild stands nearby and asks why Alberich follows him. Siegfried explains that he killed the man's former master. They also discuss his famous dragon story. Siegfried was an apprentice sent into a dangerous valley. His master secretly hoped he would never return. After wandering for weeks, Siegfried found the sleeping dragon. He calls this the most beautiful moment of his life. Kriemhild looks confused and asks why he killed it. Siegfried just looks away toward the running water. He stays completely silent and refuses to answer. Kriemhild hears a spooky whisper while crossing a swampy forest. She ignores Siegfried's warning and turns around in fear. She sees a creepy knight covered in dark vines. The figure flashes into a vision of her dead father. Kriemhild runs away and weeps by a large tree. She admits her father's face is fading from her memory. She feels terrible for hating him after his betrayal. Siegfried kneels down and pulls her into a warm hug. They share a deep kiss and make love on the ground. Later, Kramitil gently touches Siegfried's sleeping face in the dark. He wakes up violently and grabs her throat in panic. He realizes his mistake and quickly lets her go. Meanwhile, a brutal army of Huns burns a quiet village. Their fierce leader, Etzel, watches the blazing valley from a hill. His massive forces continue spreading death across the western lands. Gunther realizes his kingdom desperately needs strong new allies. He walks to a large map and stabs a dagger into Iceland. Later, a young council member enters a dimly lit stone room. He finds Hagen standing quietly within the dark shadows. The young man disapproves of Gunther's plan to contact Queen Brynhilde. He explains she belongs to the magical and banished old ones. Gunther recently heard the Valkyrie Queen calling in his dreams. The council member believes Alberic planted these false visions. Because of this trickery, Alberic is locked in a dungeon. Hagen walks down the stone stairs holding a flaming torch. He approaches a heavy iron gate and peers inside. Hagen asks Alberic for information about the Valkyrie Queen. Alberic explains that the invincible queen lured Siegfried to Iceland. The two lovers spent an entire year living together. Then Siegfried suddenly left and completely shattered her heart. Alberic claims that Siegfried still truly loves the powerful queen. Hagen uses an iron key to unlock the heavy gate. He pushes the metal door open and steps inside the cell. He lifts his flaming torch, but the room is empty. Alberic has mysteriously vanished without leaving a single trace. Hagen firmly warns the young princess against trusting Siegfried. Kriemhild quickly dismisses his concerns with a confident stare. Later, Hagen finds King Gunther near a misty river. He shares the marriage news and suggests a strict condition. During a loud feast, Gunther stands at the long table. He gives his blessing, but demands a major favor. Siegfried must safely guide him to the distant Iceland. Gunther plans to propose to the powerful Valkyrie Queen. Siegfried glares furiously at the king, but ultimately agrees. Soon after, Gunther and his men board a ship. The dark ocean weather quickly turns incredibly freezing cold. Thick white frost heavily covers the wooden ship's ropes. Suddenly, a fierce night storm hits the fragile wooden vessel. The terrified crew desperately struggles with the wild ropes. Meanwhile, Siegfried holds the mast and laughs manically loud. A massive rogue wave violently strikes the small ship. King Gunther helplessly tumbles into the dark, freezing water. Hagen immediately jumps overboard to save his drowning leader. Hagen pulls himself onto a rocky shore in the morning. He is devastated to find his dead friends in the crashing waves. Hagen later spots Siegfried and a few other tired survivors. The small group continues their long, difficult journey on foot. They eventually walk into a thick and eerie green fog. Siegfried immediately orders all the men to drop their weapons. Armed soldiers silently emerge from the mist and surround them. Siegfried asks General Senua to take him to the queen. The bound group is marched toward a fortress near a volcano. Angry locals yell and viciously attack them at the gates. Rough burlap bags are forcefully shoved over the men's heads. Hagen quickly loses consciousness in the middle of the chaos. Someone later pulls the rough bag off Hagen's dizzy head. He finds himself inside a large room with General Senua. A massive stone dragon is beautifully carved into the wall. Senua explains Gunther must defeat the queen to win her. A nearby pile of skulls proves many challengers have failed. Afterward, Hagen goes into a dark cave to see Gunther. Gunther sits quietly and holds a sword given by the queen. He explains the queen is nothing like the old legends. Gunther realizes he must brutally fight her to survive here. Meanwhile, Queen Brunhilde visits Siegfried alone in a dark room. Siegfried insists he only came to safely guide the group. He clearly states that he plans to marry the princess. Brunhilde steps closer and points out he still returned here. The men reunite on a wide beach of black sand. A volcano erupts behind them as Hagen scolds Siegfried. He glares with his one good eye and demands to leave immediately. But Gunther firmly shakes his head and refuses to walk away. Even Siegfried warns that the queen is too strong, but Gunther stands his ground. Siegfried explains they must fight her together and calls for Albrecht. They enter a dark cave and a figure cuts Siegfried's back with a stone. Dark blood drips into a small bowl for Gunther to drink. Hagen and Siegfried step into a dark pool while Gunther drinks the blood. Gunther falls to the rocky ground and writhes in intense pain. Hagen and Siegfried submerge themselves completely underwater. Gunther gasps in sudden relief as he absorbs their combined strength. Later, Gunther stands on a vast glacier while women paint his face black. Senua warns him about the deadly combat rules. If his blood hits the snow, he will definitely lose his head. If Brunhilde bleeds instead, she must leave the island with him. The fierce fight starts, and Brunhilde quickly knocks Gunther's metal helmet away. He surprises her by easily blocking her heavy sword strikes. They clash violently across the ice for several long minutes. Finally, bright red drops hit the white snow. Brunhilde looks down in complete shock because the blood comes from her leg. Gunther immediately drops his weapon to release the magic power. Inside the cave, Hagen and Siegfried burst from the water gasping for air. Brunhilde touches the volcanic soil and cries over her departure. The group eventually rides back into the borders of Burgundy. They discover ruined villages with fires burning across the land. Gunther looks absolutely devastated by the massive enemy destruction. Soldiers flee their posts, so village men hide in fear. The leaders urgently arrange a grand double wedding for alliances. Siegfried and Kriemhilde share a warm smile at the altar. Meanwhile, Brunhilde and Gunther look very cold during the ceremony. The bishop tries to crown Brunhilde, but she stops him. She firmly places the heavy crown on her own head. Later, Brunhilde suddenly attacks Siegfried inside the crowded stone courtyard. She beats him down in front of the entire army. Brunhilde throws her head back and screams fiercely in anger. That night, Hagen sees his men looking completely hopeless. He stands up to deliver an inspiring and powerful speech. He tells the soldiers to follow the protective new queen. In the morning, a glowing volcano erupts behind the army. The men view this fiery explosion as a lucky sign. Brunhilde draws her weapon and charges toward the enemy line. Every single soldier eagerly follows her lead without any hesitation. The clash is incredibly brutal, and death covers the field. Brunhilde slices through the invaders with her amazing physical strength. Her fierce leadership pushes the team toward a quick victory. Edsel stares at her overwhelming power from his dark horse. He has no other choice but to signal a retreat. A massive fire burns as the soldiers celebrate their victory. Siegfried and Brunhilde stand intimately close together in the chaos. Hagen watches their secret moment closely from the dark shadows. Later, Hagen pulls Siegfried aside in their snowy winter camp. He firmly warns the young warrior to stay loyal to Kriemhilde. Siegfried agrees to behave and pulls Hagen into a tight hug. The victorious army soon returns to the grand stone castle. In a dark bedroom, Siegfried begs Kriemhilde to run away. She quickly refuses because she belongs with her royal family. On another day, Kriemhilde releases a white falcon into the air. She walks with Hagen and asks why he never married. Hagen simply admits that he always had more important duties. Inside the throne room, a local man begs King Gunther for help. Siegfried boldly interrupts the speaker to offer his own help. Gunther looks completely furious at this public show of disrespect. He harshly commands Siegfried to immediately step back in line. Gunther visits Hagen in a dark room lit by a fireplace. He complains that his new wife completely ignores him. He asks Hagen for the real truth about their battle. The one-eyed warrior simply claims they fought and achieved victory. Later, everyone sits together at a long dining table. Siegfried disrespectfully pours wine over a councilman's meal. The insulted man gets up and leaves the hall. An angry Gunther stands up and scolds Siegfried aggressively. He tells the young warrior he is not true family. Siegfried reacts poorly and throws a piece of food. Hagen steps in before the tense situation turns violent. That night, Gunther follows a rider into the dark woods. He hides behind a large tree in the pouring rain. He watches his wife kissing Siegfried passionately in the dark. The king later meets with Hagen inside a gloomy crypt. He demands ultimate loyalty to protect his royal family. Hagen finally agrees to handle the terrible burden. Siegfried soon spends some quiet time with a sad Kriemhilde. However, he still fights multiple men inside a dirty tavern. Later, Hagen and Siegfried hunt together in a foggy forest. They spot a beautiful white stag standing between the trees. Hagen quietly aims his drawn bow at Siegfried's back. He hesitates and slowly lowers the deadly weapon instead. Siegfried shoots the stag and kneels by the dead animal. Hagen sneaks up with a sharp dagger, but stops again. The older man then draws his sword and confronts Siegfried. He kicks another blade over to the young warrior. Siegfried picks it up and they immediately clash blades. They strike each other fiercely among the autumn leaves. Eventually, both men lose their weapons on the forest floor. They tackle each other and begin throwing brutal punches. Hagen grabs Siegfried and shoves his face underwater. They thrash around in the shallow, muddy stream. Suddenly, Siegfried grabs a fallen blade. He stabs Hagen deep in the thigh. Hagen screams in pain and lets go. The brutal fight continues on the wet forest floor. Siegfried finally overpowers the injured Hagen. He pins Hagen down and presses a sword to his neck. Siegfried prepares for the final killing blow. Suddenly, Gunther appears right behind Siegfried. The king thrusts a spear entirely through Siegfried's chest. Siegfried gasps and collapses dead onto Hagen. Hagen quickly tells the king to ride away. He insists no one can ever know Gunther was here. Gunther flees the dark forest on his horse. Hagen slowly stands up and looks around. He spots a dark, hooded figure watching from afar. Hagen walks toward the mysterious black shadow. When he gets closer, it is only a burnt tree stump. Later, Hagen rides into the gray city courtyard. He leads a horse carrying Siegfried's wrapped body. A large crowd gathers around them in shock. Hagen loudly announces he killed Siegfried in a fair duel. Kriemhild walks outside and sees the dead hero. She falls to the cold stone floor and weeps. That night, they hold a somber funeral outside the castle walls. Fire braziers burn brightly around Siegfried's resting body. Hagen stands near the corpse and defends his harsh actions. He claims the murder was necessary to save their kingdom. Hagen tells Kriemhild her guards can execute him right now. Kriemhild stares at the warrior with pure hatred. She flatly refuses to order his quick death. Instead, she curses Hagen to live a long life. She reveals she is pregnant with Siegfried's child. Kriemhild tells Hagen he must live to watch this child grow. She promises this cruel fate will be much worse than dying. Thanks for watching.